It's very weird to see people defending the USSR. Even hardcore communists like Vosh distance themselves from that brutal regime. Because now we know what the KGB was doing. The archives have been opened and we can see the human misery and suffering they have brought upon the world. So even the most convinced communists, they try to distance themselves from that. But to anyone that would support the Iron Curtain and the Soviet Union and its satellite states, I have to ask a single question. Why were their borders closed? If it was an actual utopia, if it was so good and so wonderful, why weren't people allowed to leave? Surely if it's a nation that's better than everywhere else, people don't want to go away from it. They want to stay inside. In fact, if it was such an amazing system, wouldn't you have to deal with people trying to get in rather than go out? Wouldn't you have migrant caravans trying to get into the USSR? Wouldn't you have people from Western Germany trying to climb the Berlin Wall in order to go to East Germany? How do you explain that? Not to mention, the communists, especially the ones in Romania, by today's standard, would be considered far right. I mean, they are so far right, I suppose even actual neo-Nazis would be put to shame. Let's look at some of their policies. Criminalizing the LGBT community. Like, I'm not talking about just hateful rhetoric. I'm not talking about being against the ideology. No, I'm talking about, like, if they knew that you performed gay sex with someone else, they would put you in prison. All right? Like, that's what the communists did. And yet, I am shocked and appalled when I see, like, LGBT people in the US having various communist paraphernalia. Because it's not just in Romania that they did this. It's throughout the entire Soviet bloc. Every single communist nation, I think even the ones that are today, like North Korea, they persecuted the gay community. They shot people who tried to jump the border. Like, if they caught you trying to escape, trying to jump the border, they would try to detain you, but if they couldn't, they would shoot at you. Like, the soldiers were armed. They had, as they call it, war ammunition in Romanian legislation. So, you know, you might freak out, oh yeah, like, people aren't being mistreated, but no, they would just have, like, guard houses and they would shoot people trying to get out. Abortions were banned. Like, in my country, women had to go after the age of 16 to a doctor's appointment in order to see if they're pregnant or not, in order to monitor to see if they are pregnant so that they can't have an abortion. All contraceptive measures were banned. No condoms, no pills, no nothing. You know, like, and yet you have, like, left-leaning people that are glorifying this, and to me it's just, like, very bizarre. Okay, so here we have on TikTok a viral video with a lady which is trying to, I guess, explain to people how life was in the USSR.
Were people allowed to own property in the Soviet Union? The short answer is yes. You could own personal property, anything that was available for purchase, your books, your clothes, your furniture, a car, or anything the government issued to you, like an apartment or a vacation home. What you couldn't own was land. So let's say you had a cabin outside of Moscow as your vacation home. You own the cabin, but you did not own the land it was sitting on. That belonged to the government, and they were just letting you use it.
I don't think many people question if you can own something or not in a socialist system. The socialism aspect is seizing the means of production, which means the country, the government, if you will, becomes like a monopoly. And they are the only ones that can give you a job. You can't leave the country, the borders are closed. So the only way you can get a job is through the government, which is now in complete control and completely decides how people get to make money. They decide who gets to be promoted. They decide who gets to be demoted. They decide who gets to be in charge of the factory. They decide who gets to mop the floors. It is completely up to the government to decide whether or not you get a job. So it's nothing like in a capitalist system. Because if you have the correct connections, if you know the people at the top, then they can put you in a very nice, cozy position, whether or not you have the merit or you're able to perform that position. And it's one of the many reasons why the Soviet Union failed economically, because they would put people that were incapable and incompetent in positions of authority over other people that were capable or competent. So, for example, you could have factory workers that were smarter than the engineer that was supposed to be their boss. And their boss was the one calling all the shots. And usually the boss was there because of political connections. Like maybe he was a relative or knew someone from the inner party. Now, regarding ownership, yeah, I mean, absolutely, you could own your clothes and you could own the personal items that you have, but you would find that these little things, these gender signifiers, these earrings, yeah, they were very difficult to come by because the government was focusing on creating the absolute essentials. So yes, like clothing was an essential thing, but you wouldn't see diverse type of clothing. There wasn't a lot of expression, personal expression, because all clothing, most of them were the same. Like the government wasn't focusing on luxury, they weren't focusing on allowing people to express themselves because they were forcing on equality. So everyone had to look the same. Every single person had the same things. Jeans actually were very impossible to come by because the government wasn't producing them. And if you did have jeans, you could actually get in trouble because the question is like, how did you manage to get them? Right? And usually it was sailors that travel abroad in the West, through legal means, but they would also have like some side business on the side, some hustling. And they would purchase clothing and illegally transport them into USSR. And if you happen to know one of these people, you could probably get a pair of jeans, which, again, it was very difficult to show in public because then everyone would start questioning, like, where did you get them? And you couldn't answer that because you got them illegally. So, you could own the things you wanted, but there weren't that many things available compared to what was in the West. And secondly, it's like, yeah, okay, you can buy whatever you want, like personal property, you can buy it. But again, if the government just doesn't want you to get a job, how are you going to use the money in order to get them? Like today in Romania, for example, if I can't get a job, I can just leave Romania and I can go to another place where I can apply my trade. The government has no control over where I can exert my labor. In communism, you couldn't do that. And a lot of people who are very talented and very skilled couldn't get a job just because they had politically incorrect opinions. Like maybe they didn't worship the great dear leader the way they were supposed to worship him. Maybe they were caught saying that life would be better under capitalism. There was no such thing as freedom of thought. Like the government was very interested in knowing exactly what you say. And I remember a student protest in my town where you had the students going out protesting, demanding water so they can clean themselves and electricity so they can study at night. And there was a massive crackdown on these people, like the police beat them brutally. Do you know what the papers wrote about that? Absolutely nothing. It's only the people in this area that knew because they saw it on the streets happening. The papers didn't write anything because guess who owned the papers? That's right, the government owned the papers. So why would the government allow the papers that they own to write an article against the government? Makes no sense, right? There were water shortages and electricity shortages. You're not allowed to talk about it. If you talked about it, you could get fired from work. And yeah, sure, you have the clothes on your back, but good luck buying more if you don't have any job, because it's not like you get fired from a job, It's not like in the United States, okay, you got fired from working at Tesco. No, you got fired from everywhere, because the government owns everything, and they know why they fired you, like the bureaucrats knew why they fired you from one place. Good luck finding another job now. So, it's really interesting because when you talk about these things, a lot of people just okay, they say the government got you fired. And a lot of Westerners, they think, oh, well, you got fired, you're going to get a new job anyway. Because they apply what they hear to their current system. They don't think about the greater picture that existed in the Soviet Union. And then it's the idea that you own the house, but you didn't own the land. Yeah, I mean, at any point, the government can tell you to vacate your house because they want to bulldoze it. What do you do then? It's like, oh, well, you get to own it. I mean, well, yeah, if you don't own the land under it, then technically you don't own it.
You could not own commercial or income property. So you couldn't own a factory or an apartment building that you leased to tenants. The government owned that. And when it came...
So this is an interesting concept, ownership. We used to have this thing, it's like no one owns their land, but some people live on better land than others. Because here's the thing. Let's say you were a person in charge of a factory. I think they would call them a factory administrator. You would make a lot of money. You could actually do a lot of side hustle and business under the table. And at the same time, you had a lot of respect. So I ask you, like, what's the difference between actually owning the company or the government just allowing you to own the company? Because in this system, like, technically you're in charge. You know, like, it's pretty much like your factory. It's just that, well, it's not legally yours, but you can act as if it's yours. And again, like, this system promotes incompetent people at the top. I think like a really good view of this was in the TV show Chernobyl, which in my opinion is a very good show in the way they are recreating history and they're recreating the time period. And you get to see like a person that was a shoe sailor or something like that being placed in a position of power and looking with disgust and disdain at the scientist that comes to him. Why? Because the scientist actually went to a university. The shoe seller did not, so he feels inferior to the scientist. And as such, he's lashing out. He just has like this disgusting, disparaging view, similar to how I suppose Marvel editors have towards their fans, if you will.
Came to housing, there were some restrictions on what you could do with it. You couldn't sell it, but you could trade it to someone else for their apartment, and you could pass it down to family members. And yes, the government could take it away if you did something they really didn't like, or if they wanted to move you somewhere else, for example. But that is not unique to communism. Look up civil forfeiture and eminent domain if you don't believe me.
And I think this is the core aspect and the main reason why socialism doesn't work. Because if the government can seize the means of productions, then the government can literally seize everything. Think about it this way. Imagine when you were a kid and mommy and daddy gave you money for allowance. And you lived under their house. Were you really independent? I mean, sure, you owned stuff. You know, you owned the shirt on your back. You owned your toothbrush. You owned your shoes. But again, like mommy and daddy could just take them away and like, what do you do? What do you do if mommy just said, you know what, I'm taking your shoes away, you're grounded, you're not allowed to go outside anymore because you did something bad. I don't like what you did, so I'm just confiscating your shoes until you behave and then I'm going to give them back to you. What can you do? What recourse do you have? You're not an independent person. You have to listen to your parents if you want your lifestyle to be at a decent level. But again, like this is what we do to children because they grow up and eventually they leave the household. They become independent. There was no leaving the Soviet Union. The government was your parents. They were the ones that gave you stuff, which is why it's called the nanny state. They took care of you like a nanny. Except that, well, at least the nanny is still held accountable of its decisions. You can still call the cops if the nanny does something bad. Now, can you? But yeah, so another interesting aspect is the comparison that in a capitalist society, technically under certain circumstances, the government can kick you out of a house. And I think even in my country, for example, if they want to build a highway, let's say through my house, and it's a very important and strategic highway, yeah, the government can say, look, we're going to kick you out of your house and we're going to compensate you for it. Okay? But this happens quite rarely because the government has to pay for every single person that they evict and they have to pay them a fair price. They have to pay them fair market share. And it's to the point where a lot of people who know that there's going to be like a highway through a couple of housings, they will try to buy those houses so that the government kicks them up and then pays them the fair price. And these people will usually then start lawsuits with the government to try and take a better price. But my point is that this is like just a fringe exception under capitalism that the government can kick you out of your house. If you look at the Soviet Union, especially in my country, in Romania, which was a satellite state of the system, the great dear leader moved a lot of people from the rural areas to the urban areas forcefully. Because he wanted to industrialize Romania. So he would just go into a countryside and tell everyone, no, you're moving to the city now. And he could do this arbitrarily. And there was no recourse against it. You couldn't do anything against that. Why would you want such a system? I mean, think about it this way. You know, like for generations, your family knew and knows one thing, how to plow the land. and how to raise animals at the farm. And then the grade year leader comes to you and says, you're going to work in a factory from tomorrow. Pack up your things. You're going to this building. Doesn't matter if you like the building or not. Doesn't matter if it's better or not than your home. You're going to go here and you're going to get a job in the city at a factory. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's really nothing you can do. And it's like, why would you want this? It's horrible. It's inhumane. Yeah, so this is why it's very bizarre to see people still advocating for the Soviet Union today. In the comments, if you go there, like there's a lot of communists that are like, oh yes, this was such a great system, such an amazing system. I bet they wouldn't last even 2 weeks under such a system. Because everything they do, like even TikTok, like showing your face and talking in public, that wouldn't be allowed. Are you crazy? Like speaking in public was highly controlled. It was only a few people that were allowed to do it. You wouldn't be able to be a YouTuber like Vosh. You wouldn't be able to be a person like this lady talking on TikTok and whatnot. No, like this lady would be sent to do patriotic work connected to her high school or her university. And patriotic work was literally slave labor. It was a group of children volunteering in order to go out and plant trees or help with the harvest and the crops or clean up the city. And it was voluntary. But hey, you want a job, don't you? Can't look good on your resume that you never volunteered to do patriotic work or that you skipped volunteering for doing patriotic work. And by the way, the volunteering was proactive, like you were considered to be a volunteer unless you complain. And heaven forbid you complain. Well, a little slave labor. You didn't get any compensation for it. But it was considered good because it teaches the younglings about civic duties and patriotism and whatnot. Let me know what you think. I'll see you guys in the comment section.